Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Sustainability Talks. I'm your host, Rob Genieser, Managing Partner of ETH Partners, Europe's leading venture capital firm focused on backing businesses that deliver what we call sustainability through innovation. I'm pleased to welcome today's guest, Konstantinos Kyriakopoulos, Greek entrepreneur and the co-founder of DeepSea AI, a cutting-edge startup that develops AI-powered solutions for the maritime industry. In 2017, Konstantinos co-founded DeepSea AI with a vision to revolutionize the maritime industry with advanced AI technology. As the CEO of DeepSea AI, he oversees the development of the company's AI-driven solutions for optimizing vessel performance, reducing fuel consumption, and curtailing carbon emissions. Konstantinos has received numerous awards and recognition for his work at DeepSea AI, including being named to Forbes' 30 Under 30 list in 2020. His passion for AI and commitment to solving real-world problems has made him a highly respected figure in the technology industry. In today's episode, we discuss why it is critical for AI to be embedded across the sector and how emerging technologies have the potential to create a greener maritime industry. Thanks for joining Sustainability Talks. And now over to Konstantinos. Tell us a little bit more about your background and how you became interested in AI.
Hi, Rob. It's great to be here, and thank you very much for that very kind introduction. So I got into AI actually academically. I studied it. I began doing an undergrad in information engineering, and I became very interested by what was already started going on. This was around 2013, 2014 in the space. I did my master's in it. I did my PhD in it. And so, I really entered in the kind of traditional way.
So Konstantinos, you studied it with the goal of doing what with it?
I mean, it's a very good question. I mean, initially, I just wanted to figure out what it is. I heard the term being thrown about, didn't really understand what it meant. And so that's how my interest first got into it. To kind of really understand. And then once I understood what it was, I very, very excited by the possibilities that it had. I mean, AI, the way we use the term now, refers essentially to kind of advanced forms of deep learning. Essentially, it's algorithms that see lots of examples of something being done, no matter how complicated that is, and then are able to replicate. And the same basic algorithms have an enormous number of applications. So we're now all familiar with these generative AI solutions that have been given many, many conversations and are thus able to replicate and hold new conversations based on finding the most likely thing that would be responded. We're familiar with systems that have seen many pictures and so produce new pictures. We're familiar, maybe for a longer period of time, with systems that have seen lots of pairs of pictures and have learned to distinguish whether they're of the same person. So that's the machine that looks at your face and your passport at the airport and lets you through. And so, most of what we're familiar with have to do with image and speech. As my PhD was also in the speech and language field, I got very interested early on in the sorts of things that can be done with it in more heavy industry, the things that didn't have so much interest, certainly at the time, and that wasn't the direction that everyone else was going into it, because it seemed to me that there are all sorts of machines and industrial processes that are necessary for our everyday lives, which rely on daily decisions, which could be made much more efficiently if all the data that is available were taken into account. And my kind of light bulb moment of where I wanted to devote the next, I don't want to say few, but next several years came when I had my first conversations with the other co-founder of DeepSea, Roberto, about the shipping space. He was working in the shipping space for a number of years, and he also had a background in AI. And we were talking about how in the shipping industry, enormously consequential decisions, from the speed and routes of vessels to selecting vessels for particular voyages to operating engines, are taken all the time by a web of different parties with different interests on a essentially hunch and rule of thumb basis, and in some cases a heated negotiation basis, without any predictability of how these decisions will affect the outcome that everyone desires, the profitability of the different parties, the environmental outcomes, the CO2 emissions of the vessel. All the decisions are being taken. They can't predict how that decision will impact the outcome. And yet, it is possible to measure how such decisions affected these outcomes historically over many years from the data that is collected, but at the time wasn't really being used using AI. And so this is how the vision kind of fell into place of what the future of shipping is. An AI vessel model at the center that has seen what each vessel and other vessels and similar vessels has been doing over the course it's been used, how each vessel reacts to different decisions, market conditions, weather conditions, engineering decisions, speed conditions, etc., and then is able to predict how future decisions will impact it, and then a single platform on top of that, which can transparently tell all the different stakeholders what the vessel will do under different conditions, and then determine the best decisions for what everyone wants, thus completely disrupt how this market operates. We both saw an enormous amount of waste and inefficiency, which everyone recognized, which could be resolved with the technology that already existed, but that needed to be applied to this space. And we founded this company, and we're now serving 300 vessels. We're in a position now where we're bringing demonstrable savings in cost and in CO2 emissions of the magnitude of 10% within weeks of us beginning a project in some cases with a new vessel.
So, Konstantinos, you've taken us on quite a path there. You started with your love of AI, the importance of AI, how AI can be used in a very specific area, i.e., optimizing the routing of ships in the maritime industry. But let me break it down one more time here. If we think it just at the start, right? The excitement around AI. I've been walking around, I think, the tech community, and everybody says this is going to be huge this time around. I would point out, I think the first conference on AI was pulled together in 1956, over 65 years ago. So why are we so excited this time around? Why is it happening so quickly around us?
Yeah, so I think, as you correctly pointed out, this is not new. People have been working on this for decades, and it's been improving incrementally. But there have been certain key moments where certain barriers have been broken, and it's just allowed the technology to reach a much wider range of applications. One important one was the availability of compute power that didn't exist before, which allows you to run these algorithms, which are quite heavy and quite expensive, which previously some of these things were designed theoretically in the 70s, but no one could really run them in the parallel way necessary until the kind of early 2010s. Then the other barrier was that on the basis of that, people started making tools that make it easier and easier for people to build algorithms using AI and build applications. It used to be you needed a PhD plus a number of years experience to be able to do it. Then a PhD was enough. Then a master's degree was enough. And now people that just know a bit of Python can get quite far in terms of using AI applications. And then the most recent breakthrough that has generated a lot of excitement is that with language models like ChatGPT, there's now a user interface that allows anyone to interface with these systems in natural language and kind of see in real time the power it has. And so every time something like this happens, I think it's natural that a lot of interest and excitement is generated, and the sphere of possible applications just gets a little big. But this isn't necessarily as step function, a cliff, a process as it might appear. This is actually incremental changes that have been gathering over a long period of time. And actually to roll this out and actually use it for real impact, it's also going to incrementally improve going forward. Maybe at an accelerating speed, but there's a lot of work and it's all step by step.
All right. And then how about those that say we should be careful? We should look at the consequences of what AI can do before we push it out in such a wide-ranging way. I know one of the people that said that then went off to announce that he was working on AI a couple of weeks later. So maybe you could help us understand the ethics of what you've been doing and thinking about.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you should always be careful. Whenever something new comes along, which are legal and kind of business ethics and guidelines and so on frameworks has not been accustomed to, it is important to take stock of what has changed and what needs to change in terms of regulation to take it into account. At the same time, I think it's very important not to see something new, panic, and at the moment, the incremental change in the technology that has caused this conversation, which is the public release of large language models, because large language models have existed for years before that, but the public release of a large language model, which will be followed by others. So this incremental change has not been connected to any specific harm that has actually been demonstrated. There's a lot of speculation about possible harms. There probably will be harms that will come from this. It's very important we gather more information and understand what the precise problem is that we're trying to solve so that we can move to solve it rather than go for panicked one-size-fits-all moratoriums and solutions that may not actually end up solving anything. I also think it's important to go on a case-by-case basis, because what AI means, for instance, in the shipping industry, and what it means in terms of language models, what it means in terms of processing personal data, and so on is very different. And there are some general principles that have to do with people whose data is being collected, having some control over it, the principles that have to do with not using something unless you have some understanding and some interpretability about what it's going to do. These are general common sense principles, but these have to be applied on a case-by-case basis. I'd also say that a lot of work has been done on AI ethics for a long time by experts in it. I'm by no means an expert on the ethics side, but a lot of work has been done, and there's a framework there. Right? So in terms of protecting personal data, there is a framework there. In the EU especially, we're quite advanced on this with GDPR. And those principles still apply. In individual regulators are working on how to deal with how AI will affect them. So, for example, I can tell you in the shipping space, the classification societies out there are working very hard on developing frameworks for how to ensure this is safe and keep the captain and the vessel and the people that are responsible for safety in the loop. And, these people have been working on this already. They're still working on it now. They have task forces working on it. We are involved in these conversations. And I would just say, let's not panic and follow the process we have. We're not as unprepared as maybe, watching the news would lead you to believe.
And Konstantinos, maybe one more general question before we come to how you've been using AI to make the world a better place. There's been a lot written about, we had the space race at one time between nations. Now there may be an AI race. And I guess the simple question is, how important is this technology to a country? Maybe not even just to a country, but a corporation. I note that some of the large Silicon Valley firms, are assembling just large teams, if you would, trying to grab talent and maybe, sort of preparing for the future with the best and the brightest, and trying to hold on to that talent. So maybe help us understand, how you think about the evolution of this in terms of countries and companies.
It's a very good question, a very big question. Any type of activity that involves repeating something many times and where knowledge can be extracted from historical precedent will be able to be automated to some level using it. Okay? That doesn't mean that the human job will be eliminated completely, but it does mean that it's likely that AI will become some part of how jobs are done. And so if you're in a field that AI hasn't penetrated yet, it's going to penetrate soon. And it may be done by people already in the field, it may be done by new companies like ours, it may be done by a big company like Google that's making solutions that are applicable across fields. But this is going to become a very, very important part of the economy at every single level. And so given that the economy of the future is going to be dominated so much by AI, and applications of AI are going to be bought by everyone in some capacity, you can understand how important it is for both a country and a company to figure out what they want their role to be with respect to this new reality. I think the problem for companies and countries is slightly different. I think for companies, you really need to think carefully about, given what your company is and what it does, is it going to be a research entity for new types of AI? Is it going to be a company that specializes in applying AI to new fields, or is it going to be a consumer of it? It's okay to be a consumer of AI. You don't have to do everything in-house. But even in that case, you have to think about how your own operations can adapt to be in a position that use tools that someone else will sell you, right? Because investing in in-house tools too much is also a trap. For example, even my company, we're an AI company in terms of the services we produce for our customers. That doesn't necessarily mean that every AI we use for other things, for our business automation or for else, has to be made by us. So for companies, it's really just understanding where I am in this space. In terms of countries, it's more a question of, is my economy adapted to this? And will I be able to play a role in terms of the people I have and the company I have in this new world? Or am I going to be in a position where my economy is seriously affected, my companies are going to go out of business, and I'm going to be left in the same position as an agricultural country after the Industrial Revolution? So my advice to a government, if they would listen to me, would be maybe think less about how to regulate and constrain AI and more about how am I going to encourage the development of industries around AI in my country.
Great. And I should point out your country of Greece is doing very well. I think 10% of all AI researchers in Europe today come from Greece, but yet Greeks represent, by my calculation, 1 or 2% of the population. Why is that? Why are you a hotbed for AI in your part of the world?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Again, I'm not an expert in this. I can only share my experience. I think Greeks culturally value education very highly. We're by no means the only country where this is the case, but the countries where you think still have in their culture this very strong desire for your children to get a good education, good degrees, to go into research and academia. You think more of countries in East Asia. I think we're one of the few countries in Western Europe. They're in the EU. We're part of the Western, the Cold War, and so on, where the strong cultural elements is the case. And this has led to us always being overrepresented in academia generally, and especially in STEM academia. So I just think that has just meant that we were in the right place at the right time. We were there when this was just an academic field, and we've then been in a position to then go into it as it's ventured out into industry. And then I also think we, as a country, develop a startup culture. Right? So, even 10 years ago, the idea of someone starting a high-tech company in Greece as a startup and then raising funding and then staying in Greece and having their offices was unheard of. And I don't think there were any examples, certainly not more than you could count on your hand of this happening successfully. And we cultivated an ecosystem where this started happening at just the right time when AI became a booming space. And so I think it was natural that we would start taking an outsized role at the early steps of this. And the really big question is, to what extent can we maintain this and keep going?
And Konstantinos, coming back to your opening comments, the other place that Greece or Greek companies have led is in the maritime industry. So you're combining a strength in AI alongside a naturally strong position in maritime. But coming back to your opening comments, while it's natural that you went to solve problems in the world of maritime. Maybe you could help us understand what were some of the big sustainable challenges that you saw.
Just to start with your first comment about Greece, Greece has the world's largest merchant navy. So we have this big advantage in the sea. And I think what was very important to us is that as the marine sector, like every other industry, starts digitalizing and adopting AI and other technologies, which will move a large part of the center from the sea to the land, Greece wasn't cut out of it, right? And that the advantage that Greece had in the sea could be converted into an advantage of the land. And I think the example of us and a large number of other companies in the ship tech space, which is now a very growing space, and which is very well represented in Greece, have shown that we've made some very good first steps. So you can't plug a ship into the electric grid. There's no charging stations in the middle of the ocean. There's no battery big enough for a ship, at least now. And alternative fuels, even though there's a lot of very interesting work on it, and it will happen, but really for the next couple of decades, it's not on the horizon, right? Ships just run on fossil fuels. And so because of this, for a very long time, the view was that decarbonization and shipping just don't go together. Shipping was the big exception in terms of decarbonization. It was literally exempted legally from things like the emission trading scheme, another polluter pays type schemes. And in terms of supply chain decarbonization, shipping was the last thing people looked at. This has changed very, very quickly and very intensely in the last couple of years. So from this year, in the EU at least, ships now are included in emissions trading schemes. So there's now polluter pays for ships. There's now something called CII. Every ship has to monitor their CO2 emissions per unit of cargo capacity. And not only is this monitored, but in the EU and increasingly other jurisdictions, there are caps on this. And if you don't meet the cap, you won't be able to attend the ports of the jurisdiction, right? So a ship may not be allowed to go to Rotterdam, which is obviously a death sentence for probably most ships, if they don't have their CO2 in mind. And then on top of that, you now have with scope 2 and scope 3, supply chain decarbonization now increasingly cares about shipping, and then the financial institutions with green bonds are increasingly putting pressure on the shipping companies to decarbonize. So if you're a shipping company right now, all of a sudden this has become a huge pain point for you. And long-term solutions to this problem, which are very important, like wind-powered ships, alternative fuels, ammonia, nuclear ships, etc. Maybe they will save you in 20 years, but right now you have to make efficiencies. Now, and a lot of these efficiencies are not just down to you. They're down to collective effort that needs to be made between shipping company, the ship manager, and various other parties that need to get together and change the way they operate and make decisions in order to meet the requirements of this new world that has been thrust on everyone. Now, the good news is, as I mentioned before, there's an enormous amount of CO2 being emitted ships that doesn't need to be. You could have exactly the same commercial outcome, arrive in the same port at the same time with the same cargo, and emit 10, 20, 30% less fuel and thus less CO2 just through optimization. But this optimization requires disruption in the way that decisions are made. It needs, just to give you a simple example, you can't have a contract between the charterer and the ship owner that says what the speed will be for all routes under four Beauforts of weather, one size fits all. Okay, that's not sustainable anymore, right? You need to be able to optimize on a voyage by voyage basis and an hour by hour basis, based on the specific requirements of each of each ship, and each ship reacts to weather completely different. And so that means you need systems like ours. You need a change in the internal culture, you need a change in processes, and you need a change in contracts and relationships between different companies. And that's what we're helping to drive.
And Konstantinos, if you're trying to drive change, What's your biggest barrier? I'll give you some. The data is not very good that you're working off of, perhaps. The model doesn't work. The human element, which I think in the world of shipping is perhaps the captain knows better. What do you face in terms of skepticism, and how do you get over that?
Yeah. So you've answered it for me, I think, to a large extent. I mean, I think you've really hit the four main areas. The data exists, so all vessels have either the sensors or the capability to easily install sensors to collect this data, but the quality is not always there. It's noisy. The sensors break easily. And it's kind of difficult to interpret. The industry has been, building a model which is able to capture the ship accurately and make predictions accurately is very difficult. And then on top of that, you have the operational concerns of rolling things. Our approach was to start, quite earlier, 4 years ago now we started, working on the first two problems. Okay, so we really worked on getting a framework in place that can collect data, that can evaluate the quality of the data, correct the data, and then take advantage of the large number of ships that over time we built in order to have one ship learn from the other and thus require less data than you otherwise would. And we've also worked very hard on building models that use the latest in AI in order to be accurate, but also have been tested and optimized and stress tested by people that really understand vessel performance and optimization, naval architects and captains, to make sure they're fit for purpose and adapted to the domain, and are able to have a decent level of interpretability and transparency in terms of how they work, and are causality in terms of knowing what causes. And so we've built a research level team of 10 dedicated researchers, now going up to 15, that just work on this, right? And they publish papers in terms of general AI, right? So when we found that the AI out there doesn't work for us, we look into solving the generic problem and publishing in the big AI publications, and then also in terms of applying, right? And so we're at a point now where we're very comfortable that we have that framework up. And so this has given us a big tech lead, and which we're now slowly but surely and increasingly very quickly and surely turning into a commercial lead. And doing that is now solving the last two problems we mentioned, right? Which are the problems of adoption, the problems of getting it working operationally. And we're helped on this point by the urgency that's being created by this sustainability drive and CO2 drive. And we find that large parts of the industry now are very committed to doing what it takes to drive the change within their companies, because they see they don't have a choice. And then in terms of that, it's really about building relationships with people, understanding their needs, understanding their day-to-day, and building a product, a platform on top of the AI that is able to work in practice, right? That is able to take into account all the constraints, that is able to present things in a user-friendly way, that is able to deal with all the edge cases. And this really is an iterative process. That the only way to do it is to get it out there on real vessels with real customers, and be able to modify things quickly in order to make sure we're dealing with everyone's needs, and we have something that can actually be used by the real people in their actual day-to-day lives.
And Konstantinos, I know one of the things you've done is you've worked closely with one of the incumbents in the field, a company by the name of Nabtesco, which is one of the leading marine companies in the world. How important is it to be supported by if you would, a traditional leader as you try to push forward with new technologies?
Yeah, I mean, it is incredibly helpful in terms of finding a situation where a company that has half the market in terms of Nabtesco vessel propulsion systems has the vision to be willing to engage with a startup like us in order to make AI, at the center of what they do, and bring the two things together. there is a long way that we can go on the software side with calculating the optimal decisions at different circumstances, optimal speeds and optimal routes. But then at some point, you need to deliver that to the vessel. Okay? And increasingly connecting those optimal suggestions with the onboard vessel systems, the systems that control the engine, the systems that the captain, navigation officers, and engineers are using in order to navigate and in order to control the engine. And these systems are produced by established players, which have been around for a long time. Essentially, two of them together control, I think, over 80 or 90% of the market. They're, as you can imagine, very safety critical systems, and they're well regulated. So having a partnership with one of them where we can work together to roll out this integration and to see how we need to adapt what we do to incorporate the reality of the vessel, and how they need to adapt what they do in order to be ready and to incorporate the latest in technology, means that we're going to be able to get to autonomous vessels working with AI much faster.
And Konstantinos, I was just going to put some numbers on your statements of what an impact you can have. I think 3% of the world's emissions come from ships.
That's right.
And you were saying earlier that you can reduce the amount of fuel that's burned on a journey by 10, 15%, that order of magnitude. That's a significant reduction in the world's carbon emissions that you can have today if people installed your AI today.
Yeah, that's right. It's a low-hanging fruit. Efficiency and operational optimization is something you can do straight away. And why not start with that while working on the more long-term solutions? And I think people are understanding this, and they're adopting it, and we're having a real impact in terms of the environmental impact of this industry. And we're laying the foundation to be able to do even more further on and eventually get to the end goal, which is net zero.
So, Konstantinos, maybe a last thought here. You're using AI for good, using AI to make the world a bit more sustainable. If you saw other teams that were looking to do this, what advice would you give, in terms of trying to scope out that problem, get that solution into the market, find an opportunity to have such a big impact that you're having? Hey, what would you say to those teams?
So, I think that the first thing that worked for us is that we were a partnership of someone that understood the technology and someone that really understood the industry. And that's, I think, very important. You need to have someone at the highest level of your company that understands what it's like to be your customer, and really understands what drives them. Of course, it's easier if they already understand that before, but I guess I've met people that came in from other industries and in other companies and as CEOs and really spent time learning what it is to be their customer and develop that knowledge themselves. But either way, you need to really understand the industry, and that's really where innovation comes from. It comes from these serendipitous encounters where someone that understands one thing and has a problem, and someone has a problem and is looking for a solution, someone else that has a solution is looking for the problem, come together. So that's really the first thing, identifying the idea. After that, I would say be prepared to have to be very flexible and work very hard, really quickly, and solve lots of problems that come your way. Get to the market as fast as you can. As I said, feedback from the customer can come in as quickly as possible. And then, in terms of AI, I would say one of the most important things nowadays, not the most important thing, is having a really good infrastructure for ingesting and storing and processing data, right? Really think about, what does your infrastructure look like? How is the data coming in? How is it stored? And how is that going to scale? Because that can kill you later on.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Konstantinos. That was wonderful. And thanks to all for joining on this episode of Sustainability Talks. Goodbye. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sustainability Talks podcast. To find out more or join as a guest, head over to the ETF Partners website at etfpartners.capital. You can also connect with us on LinkedIn and follow us on Medium at ETF Partners. Until next time, thanks for listening.